Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Thursday, April the 14th, 2022. I'm going to start with a breaking news story today. It illustrates the principle, the way we live now. Joe Biden's dog, or his dogs. This is a story that just won't die. It's Stephen Nelson from the New York Post. Now I'm pissed. Secret Service agents outraged by White House spin over first dog bites. Secret Service agents were outraged last year by the White House's attempt to downplay bite injuries caused by then first dog Major First Dog. It's all so tiresome. Even to get President Biden to personally pay for a damaged coat, newly released documents show. Secret Service leaders also sought to keep attack details out of official paperwork, at one point rejecting an agent's excessively detailed, that's a quotation, excessively detailed account, to avoid upsetting the first family, even after Major bit agents on 8 consecutive days. The records released in response to a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit by a Judicial Watch show that attacks occurred both earlier and later than previously known. They also show internal discord at the Secret Service, which has been embroiled since last week in a bizarre infiltration scandal that involves at least 4 agents. Well, there's the other scandal of the, not mentioned by the Post, of the Secret Service agents who are there to protect first son, Hunter Biden. And Hunter Biden lives in a palace, Malibu, and the Secret Service agents are in a house that costs $30,000 a month to rent. White House Press Secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki, acknowledged just one biting incident at a briefing on March the 9th, 2021, saying that one day earlier, quote, the first family's younger dog, Major, was surprised by an unfamiliar person and reacted in a way that resulted in a minor injury to the individual, unquote. The March 8 bite actually was the final attack in an 8-day streak, and the injured agent, whose injuries were categorized as severe by a colleague, fumed about Psaki's spin. No, I didn't surprise the dog doing my job by being at redacted, as the press secretary just said. Now I'm pissed, the agent wrote to a co-worker. The colleague replied, SMH, shake my head, hope you didn't get hurt too bad. Another message written by an unknown Secret Service employee refers to photos of the bite area and said the, quote, injury cannot be described in any other term than severe, unquote. The incident occurred at about 7 a.m. March 8th as the agent was in the second floor White House residential area with First Lady Jill Biden. Quote, without warning or provocation, Major barked loudly at the agent and charged, unquote, is how a newly released, heavily redacted incident report describes what happened. Having no time to seek cover from the attack, the agent turned away from the dog as he bit into redacted right leg. About an hour later, President Biden's then chief protective agent, David Cho, wrote in an email, Major bit one of the agents this morning. The agent is okay, but does have some bruising and a puncture. The agent was bitten by Major a second time, but it is unclear when. They were the only known PPD, Presidential Protective Division agent, to have suffered 2 attacks from Major in less than 10 days, according to a June email. Photos of injuries were redacted in the records, but one photo that was released shows an agent's wool overcoat that was ripped March 6th as the President and First Lady returned indoors from the White House tennis pavilion. As Major came around the corner, he attacked me unprovoked, tearing the wool overcoat I was wearing that evening, the agent wrote. This attack occurred through no fault of my own, and I could not avoid this unusual circumstance due to the nature and requirements of my position. An unidentified Secret Service employee reprimanded the agent, writing, quote, please submit with the language that has been approved by the legal office. Unless you dispute anything in the verbiage that was presented to you, there shouldn't be a need to embellish with additional details that aren't required for approval. If you would like to submit a separate memo to memorializing the events of 3/6 in great detail, you certainly may. But your added language on the form provides more specificity than what the legal office requested. I've been told that if you update the request with the approved verbiage, your request will be processed. Unquote. Another email blasts the bitten agent's account as excessively detailed and inappropriate and states that I was asked to have him submit with the language that has already been approved by the legal office. Not sure if he will or not. I don't think it's about the money anymore. A memo said Secret Service officials explained the delicateness of the situation in terms of potential damage in the trust of our protectees to the bitten agent. The agent ultimately withdrew his request for reimbursement, saying the first family should have to pay for the damage rather than the Secret Service. After some deep thought and reflection, I don't believe that USSS should be responsible for the damage to my coat, as the cause was not under their control. To be compensated in this manner would essentially have the cost borne by the taxpayer, and this would be unjust, the agent wrote, adding, the responsibility should lie with the party responsible for the wrongdoing, i.e. tort, and that, of course, would be the dog owners. It's unclear if President Biden paid for the coat, which was valued at more than $500, according to one document. Psaki did not respond to the New York Post request to comment on the agent's criticism of her spin or say whether Biden paid for the agent's coat. The Secret Service also declined to comment. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton said these documents show Major was a dangerous dog and the Biden White House lied about it, placing Secret Service and other White House personnel at needless risk. And it seems the Secret Service management seemed more concerned about managing press relations than taking care of its agents. In fact, the agency is still withholding information about this mess. Major was given to family friends late last year, the White House said, but his present whereabouts are unknown. Since his departure, Biden's elder German Shepherd, Champ, died, and the first family acquired a new puppy of the same breed, yes, doubling down on failure, named Commander. The full timeline revealed by the documents indicates the agents were bitten in two previously unreported incidents on February the 28th, 2022, first around 9 a.m. and then around 7 p.m. at Biden's home in Wilmington, Delaware. In the first attack of the day, the dog charged across the lawn and an agent turned around to avoid a direct attack and got bitten in the right thigh. A photo taken a week later showed an oval-shaped bruise that demonstrates the outline of the dog's closed jaws. Later in the day, President Biden took his older dog, Champ, inside, but left Major outdoors. Yes, okay. And let's get to this part here. Biden fractured his foot in November 2020 while playing with Major in Delaware. The then president-elect said that he tugged the dog's tail after a shower, then tripped on a rug. Okay, so you come out of the shower and you're naked and wet, so you decide to pull on the dog's tail. Aside from children, who pulls on dogs' tails? They don't like that. This story is obviously completely made up, but why would it be necessary to concoct such a preposterous story? So it doesn't appear that Joe Biden and his wife, Dr. Jill, that they're dog lovers. They didn't seem to have a dog, but since he was becoming president, well, you need a dog. Donald Trump did not have a dog or any other pet. There was some criticism of him for this. So Biden, who is not a dog person, decides to get two German Shepherds, which are large, powerful dogs that need training, lest they cause, damage to people and their clothing. Yes, but Joe Biden, he's a macho man. You know all about him and his hair on his legs and corn pop and challenging people to push-up contests. And my IQ is bigger than your IQ. So he needs a manly dog, not just one, but two of them. Because, I suppose if he'd got a beagle or something like that, how would that reflect on President Joe? Later, a few months ago, the White House welcomed a cat. And the media, including the New York Times, rhapsodized about this as if it has any importance at all. I'm reminded that when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, there was a curious incident which the media decided to ignore. She claims, this was around the time of the Benghazi hearings, that she slipped on a floor and smacked her head. Now, later, her husband, former President Bill Clinton, said that Hillary was effectively out for quite a few weeks after this incident, which would indicate that it was quite a serious injury. But immediately, the White House press office said that Secretary Clinton does not have a concussion. Well, that's a relief. They also said she was not taken to the hospital. So how would they know whether or not she had a concussion if she was not examined at a hospital? They have something called a concussion protocol for this. My own guess is that Hillary had suffered a stroke and it was decided to hush this up. Let's take a look at the chat. Hello to Chogakin666 and run Oscar Toe, Dan, to Professor Pohl, who says hi, buy my book. Hello to Buddy, Oscar Toe, and Don from Beyond. Oscar Toe says, did Joe become like the spirit of the dog, like in The Call of the Wild by Jack London? Brandon equals Old Yeller, says Dan. Hope all sailors aboard the Moskva are okay. You notice I'm pronouncing this in the proper Russian manner because we're all about that these days, viz. Kiev. And since we all love the Ukraine so much, we're all cheering this victory. Of course, contrary to what a great many people believe, the United States is not at war with Russia. Canada is not at war with Russia. The United Kingdom is not at war with Russia. Oscar Toe says, and the Moskva caught fire and then sank, allegedly from a Ukrainian missile attack. Oscar Toe says, Joe naked and running on all fours to lap water from the Potomac. Chogokin666 says, seems Azov Stal is lousy with foreign special forces. I will get to that shortly. British American says, I will always take the dog's side, even if she's dementia's Joe's. Biden had an SS reputation for walking around swimming nude, says Chogokin666. Dan says, it's becoming more difficult to discern between Major and Joe. Well, my father, he had a German Shepherd, got a German Shepherd when I was quite young, like 5 years old. It did not work out. The dog took to biting at people, children, and had to, be taken away somewhere. Not doggy heaven, I hope. The dog later escaped and ran back to the home, and I was saddened when I was told that no, we can't have the dog here. Later, when I was in high school, I think grade 11, he got another German Shepherd, and or it could have been a Doberman. Yeah, it was a Doberman called Duke. And this dog was not trained either. And the dog proceeded to tear up the heavy, expensive curtains in the dining room, tear up the hardwood floor, and it once ate a library book that I'd left on a coffee table, leaving me to pay for the full cost of this hardcover book, which was considerable in those days. And but actually, after the floor started to be torn up, it was decided that Duke was going to be sent away to the country. These dogs need to be trained. They need to be. Otherwise, bad things are likely to happen. Did Joe and Hunter's demons fly into these dogs? Ask Oscar Toe. Joekin666 says, never trust a person who doesn't take owning a dog as a commitment. Poor character. Hello to the salamander penitent. I don't think any animal likes having its tail pulled, says Anran. I know that cats certainly do not. As Oberon Waugh once wrote, the curious thing about cats, that if a cat is, perfectly happy, content, And if you just put your hand around the cat's tail, the cat will, try to separate the tail from the rest of its body for some reason. Oh, beavers do enjoy like having their tails pulled, says Chogoken 666. And who else do we have? They don't need extensive professional training, just some basic common sense training, says Anrun. Well, my late boss, Peter Weisbach, had a Doberman, and I was living in his house for a couple of months in San Diego when I started working at Kogo Radio. And this dog was, it was sticking its head in my lap constantly and being generally annoying. And I got told off for not using the proper commands to the dog because this dog had been through 2 rounds of training. Well, okay, I don't like to bark at other people's dogs because many of them live by the precept, love me, love my dog. But Peter and his wife, they rarely went out, like once or twice a year, but they went to some event and they hired a babysitter for their child. And the babysitter, the dog was really bugging this teenage girl. So I decided, okay, I'll step in here. I've been informed the commands. So I started, barking the commands at the Doberman with the necessary amount of sibilance, which I'm told is important. And the dog did not desist. What the dog did was to pin its ear back and start growling at me. And I decided to flee. Later, this dog, I used to have these editorial meetings in the office in his basement. And I don't know, they'd start at like 7 in the morning and go to noon. And so at noon, we were walking up the stairs to get lunch. And his daughter, his young daughter, went to greet her father. And so this made me a threat because I was supposedly getting between the daughter and the father, and the dog jumped up and bit me on the behind. I sterilized the wound with hydrogen peroxide, and I was rather surprised to see that an enormous bruise, a fist-sized bruise, formed, which was at first green and then turned black. Just to give you an idea of how powerful the jaws of such dogs are. But of course, I was informed that this was somehow my problem, that the dog thought you were a threat. I've been around, every day for weeks now. Why would the dog think that I'm a threat? But, you know how this goes. Kevin could have played the guy in Airplane whose Robert Stack dog won't leave alone, says Anne Run. Yes, indeed. Pit bulls were 80s, Rottweilers were 90s, says Salamander Penitent. Well, you know about the pit mommies, right? They're all over Twitter. Dr. Deadname says Joe should get a goldfish. It's all he can handle. I'm reminded of a court document, actually a testimony in some dispute between Courtney Love and her daughter, Kurt Cobain's daughter, in which she described, rather amusingly or horrifically, that Courtney Love had both a dog and a cat, and both of these animals appeared to try to commit suicide in order to get away from Courtney Love, at least according to the court filing. Hello to John S. So let's talk about Elon Musk. This is from Lauren Feiner at CNBC. Elon Musk says he's not sure he'll be able to buy Twitter after $43 billion bid, teases a plan B. Billionaire Tesla CEO Elon Musk acknowledged Thursday at the TED 2022 conference in Vancouver that he is not sure he'll actually be able to buy Twitter. The comments came hours after a regulatory filing revealed that he offered to acquire the company for $54.20 per share, or about $43 billion. Twitter confirmed that it received the bid, but its board must still review the offer, which values shares much lower than the $70 they reached last summer. But Musk said his offer would be his best and final one, which led Jim Cramer to start raving on CNBC that no, Twitter cannot accept this bid, that Musk is disqualified. Oh, okay. Is that how taking control of companies works? Asked by TED's Chris Anderson if there was a plan B if his current offer were rejected, Musk said there is. He declined to elaborate. Despite his vast wealth, much of Musk's assets are not liquid. Here we go. Leaving some analysts to wonder how he would provide the funds if his bid were accepted. Wells Fargo analysts, for example, said Thursday that Musk may have to sell Tesla shares to fund the takeover. Anderson asked if Musk had funding secured, alluding to Musk's infamous tweet when he said he would take Tesla private, which later got him into hot water with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I have sufficient assets, Musk said. I can do it if possible. Musk added in reference to the earlier Tesla take private tweet, funding was actually secured, and explained why he does not have respect for the SEC in this situation. He went as far as to call some at the agency those bastards. Under terms of a settlement with the SEC, Musk and Tesla each had to pay $20 million in fines to the SEC, and Musk had to temporarily relinquish his role as chairman of the company's board. So apparently, Elon Musk has not offered enough money. And just to, this next story is so illustrative of the corruption of Wall Street. This is from Zero Hedge. Well, this is awkward. Twitter board hired Goldman Sachs to advise it that the Elon Musk $54.20 offer is too low. Only problem, Goldman has a sell rating with a $30 price target. Oops. Yes. So this is from Jonathan Rose and Keith Griffith from the Daily Mail. What are the kingdom's views on journalistic freedom of speech? Elon Musk socks it to the Saudi prince, Twitter shareholder, for trying to block his hostile takeover bid. Twitter's board of directors is reportedly considering a poison pill plan to block Elon Musk's takeover. Musk on Wednesday night sent a letter to Twitter offering to take the company private for $41 billion. He called it his best and final offer and insisted, I'm not playing the back and forth game. Twitter's board of directors is meeting Thursday afternoon and says it will carefully review the proposal. The offer represents a 38% premium to the closing price of Twitter stock on April 1st, but it is below last year's highs. Oh, would this be before Twitter permanently banned Donald Trump from its platform, that it reached $70? Musk currently owns more than 9.2% of Twitter stock and recently turned down a board seat. Shares of Twitter jumped 5.6% at the opening bell Thursday to $48.40, below Musk's offer price. It is indicated that the market remains skeptical that Musk's takeover bid will be successful. Yes. How much of Twitter does the kingdom own directly and indirectly? What are the kingdom's views on journalistic freedom of speech? Musk asked Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. Talal's true ownership stake in Twitter is unclear. Though the prince shared a screenshot boasting of his 5.2% stake in 2015, his investment firm later reduced his stake below 5% and has not had to report any further transactions, regulatory filings show. Bin Talal is a cousin to Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, whom the CIA concluded ordered the grisly assassination of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in 2018. The Saudi government has long ranked near the worst in the world for press freedom. And so Ellen Pao stepped into this controversy in a strange place, actually. This is from Jonathan Wolfson at Fox News. Tesla CEO Elon Musk had some fun at the expense of the Washington Post in a response to an op-ed condemning his growing influence with Twitter. The Post published a piece on Friday titled Elon Musk's vision of free speech, scare quotes, of course, will be bad for Twitter. In it, tech investor and former Reddit CEO Ellen K. Pao bashed the billionaire's bought-in welcome to Twitter, calling it highly disconcerting, a slap in the face even. Musk has been open about his preference that Twitter do less to restrict speech that many see as hateful, abusive, or dangerous. Given his new influence, the way he himself has used the platform bodes ill for its future, Powell wrote. Musk, who has nearly 81 million followers, often punches down in his tweets, displaying very little empathy. He called a British caver who helped to rescue trapped young Thai divers a pedo guy, beating a defamation suit over the slur, but adding to his reputation as a bully. In February, he tweeted, then deleted a meme comparing Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to Adolf Hitler. Powell mocked the tech mogul for calling himself a free speech absolutist, writing, like many free speech advocates, he willfully ignores that private companies are free to establish some limits on their platforms. Twitter made strides to remove hate and harassment and to give users more control over how they share their opinions. It added features that let users limit who could reply to their tweets, created labels for misleading content, and banned President Donald Trump's account. After all that, bringing Musk onto the board seems like a big step backward. He can bend the company toward his preferences, removing reasonable policies on hateful speech and urging people who are harassed to have thicker skins. Yes, in an interview with Leslie Stahl, in 2018, he said that Twitter was the arena, that you're stepping into the arena, which is the way that it should be. And let's play some Pokemon cards, as Steve Saylor would say. Powell continued, Musk's appointment to Twitter's board showed that we need regulation of social media platforms to prevent rich people from controlling our channels of communication. For starters, we need consistent definitions of harassment and of content that violates personal privacy. Most companies, I suspect, would welcome such regulations. If platforms continue to push for growth at all costs without such regulations, people will continue to be harmed. The people harmed will disproportionately be those who have been harmed for centuries. Women and members of marginalized racial and ethnic groups. The people who benefit from unrestricted amplification of their views will also be the same people who have benefited from that privilege for centuries. The irony of the Washington Post publishing Powell's remark calling for regulation of social media platforms to prevent rich people from controlling our channels of communication was not lost among critics who pointed out the paper is owned by billionaire Jeff Bezos. Even Musk himself was in on the joke. Laughed my ass off, Musk retweeted in the op-ed expert. Yes. So who is this woman, Ellen Pao, who apparently is doubly marginalized because she is a woman and she is Chinese? Well, let's go to Wiki. Ellen Kangaroo Pao, born in 1970, is an American investor and former CEO of social media company Reddit. How did that go? Powell first became known in 2020 for filing an unsuccessful gender discrimination suit against her employer, venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins, and has continued to express vocal criticism of the hiring and promotion practices in Silicon Valley. Yeah, how about, sleeping with men to get ahead? When men sleep with women in the company, they often get into serious trouble. For some reason, despite being doubly marginalized, Ellen Pao didn't seem to suffer from this. Ellen Pao, of course, who is, she was divorced from her first husband. Then she married a homosexual black man called Buddy Fletcher. For some reason, they have never been seen together in photographs. They separated in 2019. And of course, Buddy Fletcher, a hedge fund manager who got into very severe difficulties based on his performance. I suppose you could call it his performance. And of course, suing his condo in New York City because they wouldn't allow him to buy up more of it. And the condo board said that you have not proved that you can actually pay for this, and that they were racist, because that's the only reason, of course. The suit against Kleiner Perkins by Powell, it didn't go well. Didn't go well for Powell, but of course she is a woman. And she is a minority. So, of course, she is, well, the whole world is conspiring against her. Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy, has weighed in on this. Max Boot, yes, born in the Soviet Union. And as I like to say, the Soviet Union did not send us its best. Well, there's him, and there's Julia Jaffe, and there's Ekaterina Jung of Reason magazine. Max Boot, I think I guess he was too young, really, to remember this. Perhaps not. But I think he really looks forward to the past, when in the Soviet Union, where dissidence was restricted to samizdat, no access to the media, and people went to prison even for their samizdat. I think that is what Max Boot wants for the United States. He wrote on Twitter, the world's richest troll should not own one of the world's most influential social media platforms. We need more content moderation, not less, to curb the excesses of social media. And the excesses of social media are people on social media who disagree with Max Boot. He tweeted, I am frightened by the impact on society and politics of Elon Musk acquires Twitter. He seems to believe that on social media, anything goes. For democracy to survive, we need more content moderation. So you see this new style democracy. Democracy means that people like Max Boot and Julia Jaffe and Ekaterina Jung, they get to decide what people are allowed to say, and they get to decide who wins elections. Because if some bad person like Donald Trump or Viktor Orban wins an election, it's obvious that the election was illegitimate, right? I mean, it stands to reason. Max Boot has been wrong about everything in his pundit career, but for some reason, he is still allowed to be a leading pundit and a Washington Post opinions columnist. Of course, once again, the irony, the Washington Post being owned by Jeff Bezos. And Bezos has a very tight relationship with the deep state. Amazon benefits richly thereby, but no possible conflict of interest there. Elon Musk, as previously noted, was in Vancouver for the TED Talk, and he spoke live about why he is offering to buy Twitter. This is reported by the Columbia Bugle. My strong intuitive sense is that having a public platform that is maximally trusted and broadly inclusive is extremely important to the future of civilization. I don't care about the economics at all. A good sign as to whether there is free speech is someone you don't like allowed to say something you don't like? If that is the case, then we have free speech. And of course, free speech is hate speech. We all know that now, right? Because our enemies have decided that free speech is hate speech. That no speech which is disapproved of by, say, Ellen Powell should be allowed on social media, and probably nowhere else as well. And yeah, Max Boot. I'm going to talk about David Mamet in a minute, because he's back in the news again because he said something completely outrageous, apparently. But I want to mention something that's going on in Canada. That is the leadership race for the Conservative Party of Canada. This is by Alex Boutillier at Global News. Poilievre, that's Pierre Poilievre camp, raises concerns over membership fraud in Conservative race. He's demanding the ban of prepaid credit cards to purchase memberships. In a letter sent to the party Tuesday, obtained by Global News, a lawyer for the Poilievre campaign suggested the use of prepaid credit cards to purchase memberships violated party rules. And if the party refuses to ban them and cancel any memberships purchased with them since February 2nd, the Poilievre campaign hinted it would see them in court. As we have repeatedly explained, our candidate does not fear losing a fair election, the letter sent by Bennett Jones' partner Robert Staley read. Instead, our candidate is concerned that the leadership might be won by a candidate who has openly acknowledged cheating and appears unconstrained by integrity and rules in his pursuit of political offices. The Poilievre campaign provided no evidence of alleged fraud, nor did Staley's letter accuse any rival campaign of buying memberships and eligible voters for September's leadership vote. But the letter quoted candidate Patrick Brown, the mayor of Brampton and former Ontario Progressive Conservative leader, jaywalking. Anthony Koch, a spokesperson for the Poilievre campaign, says Patrick Brown has described the illegal buying of memberships of people in a political race as normal as jaywalking. It is not normal, it is serious, and it is illegal. Well, you heard me speak about Patrick Brown, and he wants every Tamil person who wants to come to Canada. Greet them with open arms. Erect a statue apologizing to the Tamils and the terrorist Tamil Tiger group, because Canada was so mean to them. It was so mean to them, it let hundreds of thousands of these people into Canada. Patrick Brown knows how leadership races in every party are won in my country by enlisting instant phantom armies of ethnic minorities, typically Sikhs. It is the Sikh vote that determines every leadership race. Pierre Poilievre is not going to mention that. Too dangerous for him to do so. The new leader of the BC Liberal Party, Kevin Falcon, there were complaints, many complaints about illegal votes. And someone called Jazz Joe Hall said that this was evidence of racism and xenophobia. So we get to cheat to decide who are the political party leaders in Canada, but to complain about that can't be done. It's unheard of. It's unthinkable. Let's go back. Oh, jeez. Another motorcycle. Let's go back to the chat. Alex DeLarge says Canada is irretrievable. We're toast. Dr. Deadname likes a Sikh Phantom Army. Why the odd pronunciation of Poilievre's name? Does he not pronounce the R-E? He pronounced it Poliev or something? Yeah, something like that. What do you think about Guns N' Roses, asks Yo Mama. Well, I guess I like their first album and that EP, right? Before they went crazy. They made then they did that album, the covers album, which is pretty good. Except it had a Charles Manson song on it because, well, I guess Charles Manson is an outsider like Axl Rose. Dr. Deadname says that Boot should go back to wallowing in his white guilt, which he was happy to do in exchange for raining death on people who never harmed him. Just so. Yo Mama says, why can't white politicians just come out and say that CRT, critical race theory, is anti-white? Well, because they're colorblind. They're colorblind. Che Blutarski says, I'm a week older than Max Boot and consider myself a failure because, unlike him, I've not had a hand in the violent death of hundreds of thousands. Oscar Toe says, all these Twitter alternatives seem sleazy. Susanna Berlinski, hello, says, it is the sacred principles enshrined in the UN Charter to which we will henceforth pledge our allegiance. George Bush addressing the foreign leaders at the UN. Oh, sacred principles of Das Boot. Yeah, I don't know. When that movie, came to North America, well, have you seen this great German film called Das Boot? It's pronounced Das Boot, which you think, would be easy because it means the same thing in German and English, right? But no, we're supposed to call it Das Boot. And who else do we have here? Gloria Miller, I was sitting at home, peeking through the blinds at my neighbor's wife, minding my own business. This is from Cruel Shoes by Steve Martin. Oscar Toe says, can Twitter be bought? That is the new question. Can only certain people buy it? I've also heard from a few sources that Great Danes, very large dogs, are absolute rank cowards. As one put it, they have a reverse gear like no other dog. This second Doberman that my father bought when he moved to the Fraser Valley, every time a car drove by the house, there was this ferocious barking, which seemed to go on forever. But I remembered that once my sister and I, we'd been out for the evening, and we stumbled through the door at about 2:30 or 3 o'clock, and where's the guard dog? The guard was quivering. The guard dog was quivering in a corner. How old was the daughter? Asked the salamander penitent. She might have felt uneasy around Kevin, and the dog sensed it. I could easily see myself in being in a situation. The child was about, I don't know, 2.5, 3 years old. The child was not uneasy around me. But no, this has been explained to me years ago. After I was walking around Victoria, and I was menaced by a large dog on a leash. I thought, oh, okay, what is one supposed to do? So I went on the internet and I searched around, and I found some semi-authoritative source, which pretty much explains if you are attacked by a dog, it is always your fault. And I thought, okay, that's an end. That's an end to it then. Okay, that's it. I'm not going to argue with people like that. Why people would feel the need to have dogs, which are capable of, say, tearing someone's scalp off, that's another question entirely, I suppose. So let's talk about David Mamet, and he said something about teachers and their proclivities, which is, just inexcusable. This is from the New York Times yesterday. As Mamet returns to Broadway, his claims on pedophilia get spotlight. David Mamet's latest character describes an airplane pilot who gets lost because his map is incomplete. The pilot's answer to the question, "Where am I?" lies not on the map, but out the windscreen, says the character, speaking in the everyday language set to staccato rhythm that has been come to known as Mamet speak. That's where he is. Well, yes, there's a famous saying, right? You all know it. The map is not the territory. The New York Times continues, this new monologue is not delivered in one of Mamet's dozens of plays or films, but in a friend of the court brief that Mamet filed last month. He wrote it in support of a Texas law intended to prevent social media companies from censoring conservative voices. The law has been challenged on the ground that it could prevent private platforms from reasonably moderating content. You mean like Twitter permanently suspending Alex Berenson for repeating government information on COVID-19? Is that what is considered reasonable moderation? Of course, Alex Berenson is suing Twitter. The legal setting helps explain the absence of one typical Mamet feature, profanity. With the revival of American Buffalo, his classic 1975 drama about small-time hustlers in a Chicago junk shop, opening Thursday night on Broadway in a production starring Lawrence Fishburne, Mamet has been engaged in a blizzard of activities that are hardly standard fare for pre-show publicity, but they are very much in keeping with his long history of pushing hot buttons and with his late career embrace of conservatism and support for former President Donald J. Trump. In addition to the amicus brief, Mamet released an essay collection this month, Recessional, The Death of Free Speech and the Cost of a Free Lunch, which he complains about it's a demic word, and I can't say it, or else I'll be immediately booted off YouTube forever. Decries the left's anti-Trump psychosis and suggests that it was Democrats and the media who threatened armed rebellion in the event that their preferred candidate lost the 2020 election. Then over the weekend, Mamet fueled outrage by claiming on Fox News that teachers are inclined, particularly men, because men are predators, to pedophilia. He made the remark while discussing a Florida law prohibiting classroom discussion of sexual orientation and gender identity in certain younger grades. If there's no community control of the schools, what we have is kids being not only indoctrinated, but groomed in a very real sense by people who are, whether they know it or not, sexual predators, Mamet told the host, Mark Levin. Are they abusing the kids physically? Mamet added, no, I don't think so, but they're abusing them mentally and using sex to do so. In response, Tony Award-winning actor Coleman Domingo wrote on Twitter, apparently referring to another Mamet play, Speed the Plow, American theater, do your duty, take out the trash, buffaloes, plows, and all. And the culture writer, or as you could call him, radical gay activist, Mark Harris, wrote on Twitter, at a time of increasing threats to gay people, David Mamet has chosen to ally himself with the purveyors of a vicious, ugly slander that will endanger teachers and alphabet people Americans. It's inexcusable, unquote. Mamet declined through a representative to comment for this article. In Recessional, he dismisses the New York Times as a former newspaper and suggests that the Times and other media insists on works that express right thinking, that is, stateism. Mamet first announced his rightward turn in a 2008 Village Voice essay, Why I Am No Longer a Brain Dead Liberal. He said on a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience that he intended the essay to focus on political civility and had been surprised by the headline. He wrote last year on the website Unheard that he had been elected a non-person by the left many years ago and added, It's uncomfortable and it's costly and sad to see the happy fields in which I played all those decades, Broadway, book publishing, TV and film, fold up and hail Caesar, but there it is. The new revival of American Buffalo, one of his most admired works, and one often read as a critique of capitalism in a production starring Fishburne, Sam Rockwell, and Darren Criss, will test his ability to play on one of his main fields, Broadway, and it will offer an indication of whether, at a moment of intense political polarization, audiences are still receptive to works by artists they may disagree with. In his new book, Mamet is pessimistic on the market for challenging plays, warning that theater on Broadway has largely been replaced by pageantry, complaining of the fatuity of issue plays, and bemoaning the demise of the knowledgeable Broadway audience in an era when its theatergoers are mostly tourists. They come to Broadway exactly as they come to Disneyland, he writes in Recessional. As in that happiest place, they do not come to risk their hard-earned cash on a problematic event. They might not like the play, nor appreciate being challenged. They might just want a break after a day of shopping. His recent publicity, he seems to be doing his best or worst to make headlines, Deadline noted, may also affect the box office. Mamet, for all his concerns he expressed in his book of being blacklisted, is unlikely to be canceled from the canon. Yes, and they quote people talking about his importance to American theaters. And, Jonathan Katz says one of the reasons my friendship with David has survived all these years is we never discuss politics. And here's where David Mamet made a dark turn. Much earlier, Mamet appeared to question the liberal outlook that he said has surrounded him in the theater world with his 1992 play Oleana, depicting a disputed sexual harassment allegation a female student makes against a male professor. It was read as interrogating political correctness. For Oscar Eustis, the artistic director of the Public Theater, Oleana, which Eustis saw in its initial original run at the Orpheum Theater in the East Village, featuring Mamet's longtime collaborator William H. Macy and Rebecca Pidgeon, Mamet's wife, was evidence of a shift. Mamet's early plays, Eustis said, are tremendously morally ambiguous and complex. With Oleana, argued Eustis, who has never worked with Mamet, he actually started to put his finger on the scale. It seems to me that people misunderstand Oleana. The play's in two parts, and the feminist student, we see her in the first part as, an idiot, really, and not much of a threat. In the second part, she becomes a existential threat to the professor, and she seems to be close to all-powerful. And I think that this is a comment or a depiction of how we see other people based on, whether they're threats to us. I think that this same young woman was nowhere near as vapid as she is seen by the professor in the first half of the play, and is nowhere near as sinister as she's seen by the professor in the second half of the play. And this is really a comment, not so much on radical feminism, of course, that is touched on, but again, the inability of people to understand each other. I mean, if you you look at so many of Mamet's pieces. If you look at his movie Homicide, there is this Jewish conspiracy this rather fantastic Jewish conspiracy, which is conjured up, going back to running guns to the Jews in Israel, going back to 1947, to the present day of the movie. And it's pretty clear that this is all a product of Bobby Golds, played by Joe Mantegna's, his fevered mind. Also, because he'd been whacked pretty hard on the head at the beginning of the movie. So then we hear from a bunch of people who not just harass people who really hate David Mamet. And there's a reason, there's a reason for this. This is largely a Jewish dispute. David Mamet is an unapologetic right-winger, Trump supporter, very strong Trump supporter, and Jews are not allowed to be Trump supporters. You see a similar treatment meted out to Stephen Miller. That's another example. Now, I recall that A.G.P. Taylor, the historian, once told his younger friend Richard Ingrams, the longtime editor of Private Eye magazine, never to get in the middle of Jewish disputes because they are famously, ferocious. Now, it's curious that the New York Times didn't manage to find a single person to agree with David Mamet. But of course, that sort of thing no longer surprises me. I wrote an essay on David Mamet over a decade ago in the Dorchester Review, and it was on the occasion of the publishing of his 2011 book, The Secret Knowledge on the Dismantling of American Culture. I once had a dream about David Mamet, the American playwright, a filmmaker, and belletrist. In this dream, I confessed to him my disappointment with the final season of The Unit, the TV drama about Delta Force he co-created. In the first 3 seasons, you got the balance between men and women just right, I told him, but the 4th season was way too chicky. I mentioned this only to demonstrate my great regard for Mamet and his work, which survives the Unit's descent into bathos and will survive my disappointment with The Secret Knowledge, an apologia of sorts for his conversion from liberalism to conservatism. I see that my reaction to Mamet's book puts me in the same camp as Christopher Hitchens, but not for the same reasons. Like him, I found it irritating, but not nearly as irritating as the esteem accorded to Hitchens, a lifelong and unrepentant Trotskyite, by soi-disant conservatives from the National Post to the National Review. If Mamet had considered the astonishing development that is Hitchens' apotheosis and what it says about the movement he has joined, he would have written a better book. I later felt badly about this because I made a mistake, which is regardedly common to book reviewers, is that I reviewed the book that I wanted David Mamet to write instead of the book that he did write. Which is not to say that Mamet hasn't written a brave book. That Hollywood is liberal is a commonplace, but few outside the industry understand just how totalitarian its liberalism is. Actors foolish enough to vote Republican keep silent lest they be blacklisted. As for directors and producers, there's Joel Surnow of 24 and John Milius, and that's just about it. One suspects that Milius, a Goldwater supporter, survived long enough to become a legend. He was immortalized in parody by John Goodman in The Big Lebowski, only because he is tolerated as an idiot savant. Mamet, Surnow, and Milius are Jews, which makes their apostasy doubly sinful. In this regard, Milius relates that producer Lawrence Gordon, erstwhile president of 20th Century Fox, once told him, "You ain't Jewish, you're a Nazi." Mamet is famously pugnacious and trained in the martial arts, so it is unlikely that anyone would be rash enough to call this student of the Torah a Nazi to his face. But it is a safe bet that many doors once open to him have now been slammed shut, and that many critics who hailed him as coruscating will now assail him as a reactionary. And that prediction turned out to be absolutely true. The movie that he made for HBO a few years ago on Phil Spector, that's it. That was the last one, and I don't know whether there are going to be any others on TV or elsewhere. I continued. The Secret Knowledge enlarges on themes Mamet introduced in his 2008 Village Voice essay, Why I'm No Longer a Brain-Dead Liberal. But any Mamet student could tell you he had not been a liberal for quite some time, if he ever was. From the beginning, he has been obsessed with the question, what does it mean to be a man? And he has regarded manhood as a positive attribute, not a risible atavism. He has consistently scorned legalism theory and the cult of expertise, and has consistently extolled loyalty, physical bravery, and the code of honor. Mamet's first movie, House of Games, 1987, introduces us to his genius with what literary critics call ostranjenje, making strange, and his enduring fascination with confidence men, his vehicle for this technique. Mamet doesn't celebrate con men for their criminality, but rather for their esprit de corps, their practical knowledge, the fruit of thousands of hours of labor, and their talent for demonstrating mankind's insatiable appetite for illusion. The movie's protagonist, Margaret Ford, is a psychiatrist who has written a bestseller on obsession. Arrogant and condescending, she persuades conman Mike to teach her the tricks of his trade, which he does, but not in the manner she expects. What I'm talking about comes down to a more basic philosophical principle. Don't trust nobody, he tells her. As if that was not clear enough, he adds, it's called a confidence game. Why? Because you give me your confidence? No, because I give you mine. She thinks she's assembling material for her next book. He knows she's being made into an object lesson. She wises up, but only after paying a considerable price. In The Spanish Prisoner, 1997, madcap, sexy, and suspiciously ingratiating Secretary Susan Ricci tells engineer Joe Ross, it shows to go you never know who anybody is. He doesn't listen either. Ross has developed the process, a classic MacGuffin, which will earn his employers a fortune. Ross attempts to secure fair compensation and is continually fobbed off. His newfound suave and suspiciously ingratiating friend, Jimmy Dell, gives him the lowdown. I think you'll find that if what you've done for them is as valuable as you say it is, if they are indebted to you morally but not legally, my experience is that they will give you nothing, and they will begin to act cruelly toward you. Why? To suppress their guilt. These are some of the truest words ever spoken, but Ross foolishly presumes them merely specific and not universal. Bursting with the righteous indignation that so often animates the Mark, he accepts the confidence of those least deserving of him and, like Dr. Ford, pays dearly for his foolishness. In Red Belt, 2008, the last Mamet movie before his Village Voice pronouncement, we learned to beware of Angelinos bearing gifts. Impecunious martial arts teacher Mike Terry is subjected to a series of cons in an attempt to get him to help himself. Yet despite his superiority, he will not fight in competition. As he explains to would-be benefactor Chet Frank, competition is weakening because it's fixed. Two guys in a ring, people betting money. It may be fixed, and anyone fight may be fixed. But you train people to fight. No, I train people to prevail. In the street, in the alley, in combat, the bodyguard, the cop, the soldiers. One rule, put the other guy down, and you have to train in order to do that. Any staged contest must have rules. Everything has rules. The problem is sticking to them. Yes, rules will be broken. More important, they are always crafted to the advantage of the legislator and his pals. Never looked a gift horse in the mouth, always look a gift horse in the mouth. Sure, selflessness exists, but it's exceedingly rare. Mamet is often accused of being a cynic, but he is better described as Machiavellian as opposed to Dantean. That is to say, he always distinguishes between the formal meaning of words and their real meaning, which is what the con man does and the Mark doesn't. As James Burnham writes in The Machiavellians, Defenders of Freedom, by real meaning, I refer to the meaning not in terms of the fictional world of religion, metaphysics, miracles, and pseudo-history, but in terms of the actual world of space, time, and events. To understand the real meaning, we cannot take the words at face value, nor confine our attention to what they explicitly state. In Heist, 2001, after thief Joe Moore picks up his change from a coffee stand, he has this exchange with his partner, Bobby Blaine. Makes the world go round. What's that? Gold. Some people say love. Well, they're right too. It is love. Love of gold. From these examples, it should surprise no one that Mamet holds a dim view of big government and regards liberal schemes of improvement as illusory at best, confidence games at worst. In The Edge, 1998, Mamet personifies the liberal-conservative dichotomy. The conservative is billionaire Charles Morse, and the liberal is Bob Greene, the fashion photographer friend of Morse's wife. The script was originally called The Bookworm because that's what Morse is, despite the derision this excites. Morse and Greene are forced to fight for their lives after their plane crashes in the Alaskan wilderness, and they are stalked by a bear. While Greene dithers and whines, Morse thinks and plans. He claims to have no imagination, but his actions are based on his simple and elegant reduction of the transmission of civilization. What one man can do, another can do. From this, it is easy to guess Mamet's opinion of contemporary liberal arts education, quote, effectively a waste of money and time, unquote. And from Spartan, 2004, and the Unit, 2006 to 2009, we learn what Mamet believes to be man's highest calling, duty. The Delta Force operators here are among the world's top 150 soldiers, yet they earn only sergeant's pay and do not enjoy the protections of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, as their unit does not officially exist and their missions are secret and extra-legal. They are sworn to serve the President of the United States, but the President's men are all too eager to toss them to the wolves for political ends. Their attachment to their code is almost mystical in its nature, and they are no respecters of persons who would sully it. As one of the operators warns a progressive military psychologist, i.e., torture specialist, in Season 1, Episode 8, Seer, do not mock the ways of the past. They were born on the backs of the men and women who were there. Mamet extols the tragic view of life. Conservatives are Pelagians, almost to a man. Mamet does not hold with identity politics, the gay agenda, sex education, and the ethnic and sexual spoils system. Conservatives embrace them all. Mamet writes, traditionally, women dealt with the home and men dealt with the world. Men and women are both parents, but only one of them is created to be a mother. That there is no difference can be asserted only by those who have not raised children. Boys are born to contest the world, unquote. Any conservative who dared suggest such heresy publicly, and probably even privately, would soon find himself making a series of groveling apologies, but would find himself an ex-politician soon enough, regardless. So, yes. And I suggested at the time that I would rather have more, films and plays for him than polemical essays. By any reasonable standard, David Mamet is not a conservative. He is indeed a reactionary. More to the point, he is an artist. And as the old saw has it, ars longa, vita brevis. Let's go back to the chat here. Just let me bring it up. Hello to Yoko Yukio. What kind of bear stalks plane crash victims? I don't know. A hungry bear? It's not a good idea to meet a bear in the wilderness. This bear had killed another member of the party, and the bear has tasted human blood, and it is determined to kill and eat more people. At the bottom of every frozen heart, there is a drop or two of love, just enough to feed the birds. There's a quotation from Henry Miller's Tropic of Cancer. I watched an interview with Mamet in which he expressed a not very high opinion of The Great Gatsby. Is dead wrong. It is a great novel, says Anne Run. Oscar Toe says disliking certain groups of people in totality is for authoritarian simpletons, whereas I'm an advanced U.S. citizen of the old school. Don from Beyond, hello, says Trump's Truth Social is being spurned because of its censoring policy. For example, it deleted a post from radio host Stu Peters, who called for trial and execution of those pushing COVID shot on kids. Well, he should have said in Minecraft, right? Oscar Toe says David Mamet is one cool cat. I love that guy. Him and Hwelbeck are for best writers today. Hello to Tyrone Jackson, who says Judaism is a religion, Catholicism is a religion. No one's half Catholic, no one's half Jewish. No child has Catholic genes, no child has Jewish genes. Religion's taught, religion's not genetic. Well, Judaism is both a religion, but it is also tribal. Judaism is not a proselytizing religion, unlike the other two great monotheistic religions, Christianity and Islam. House of Games is awesome, says William Hicks. Indeed, it is. It's just, one has to admire the con, the very short cons leading to the long con, and just the arrogance of this university professor, that, oh, yes, oh, these con men, oh, they're just so charming. Well, they're not very charming when they see a mark, It's like the old joke about poker. If you sit down at the table and you don't know who the mark is, you're the mark. Okay. Let's see. Don Willis says James Garner starred in a movie, They Only Kill Their Masters, with Doberman Pinschers later. After his death, his daughter created a dog rescue named for him. True story, bro. Hello to System Analyst. Sam Rockwell. That guy is outstanding. He really is outstanding. What's the name of the fellow? Tony Shalhoub. I saw a film about the making of Galaxy Quest. And of course, Sam Rockwell's character is a red shirt who has decided, to tag along with the stars of the show, showing up to conventions. And he ends up in space for real. And he's a realist, but he's also a coward. And there's this scene where he rather breaks down. And Tony Shalhoub said, just in absolute admiration, that there were scenes where he was crawling around the floor, literally weeping in terror. Pretty funny. Okay. And now I am going to talk about, let's see what's on the schedule here. Let's see if Alex Berenson has anything to say about Elon Musk. Okay, here we go. This is from 3 hours ago. Elon has already won. He's the world's richest man for a reason. Even if he doesn't wind up buying another share of Twitter stock, he has forced the spotlight on big tech censorship in a way that nothing else has, not even the defenestration of Donald Trump. He has also highlighted the hypocrisy of the blue checks in two crucial ways. First, they had nothing to say when Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post, but are now screaming how unfair allowing a wealthy person to control a major journalism platform would be. Second, they have defended Twitter censorship on the grounds that it's a private platform. Okay, so a private person wants to buy it. He's got the money and he can do whatever he wants with it, according to what you have been yelling at me for years, right? It's a private platform. Or is it? Maybe it's quasi-public under California law because it's so large and such an important venue for speech and journalism. Or does that theory only apply when someone you don't like wants to run it? And he has another post on the same subject. Reason 1 billion, I need to be back on Twitter. This blue check, Aria Kovler, who has over 100,000 followers, has never spoken to me. Twitter is happy enough to let people libel me. Liar is a red flag libel word, and to profit by selling ads against those tweets while violating my California and First Amendment free speech rights by preventing me from answering. Aria Kovler had tweeted, I spoke to Berenson a bit. Let's see. Yeah, Berenson disputes that. Guy's a professional liar. Don't say that about very many people. Almost everyone I've encountered in the COVID skeptic world believes it to some degree. Berenson is just milking the rubes for millions. And of course, everyone else in the journalism business or the commentariat, they work for free, right? We all know that, right? They are entirely disinterested and selfless. Boy, nobody's getting rich. Nobody's getting rich except apparently for Alex Berenson. Let's go back to Tainter, the collapse of complex societies. And we're talking about the law of diminishing returns with regard to greater labor mobilization. The development of the coal-based economy in England is a case in point. Wilkinson has shown that major jumps in population at around AD 1300, 1600, and in the late 18th century each led to intensification in agriculture and industry. As the land in the late Middle Ages was increasingly deforested to provide fuel and agricultural space for a growing population, basic heating, cooking, and manufacturing needs could no longer be met by burning wood. A shift to reliance on coal began, gradually and with apparent reluctance. Coal was definitely a fuel source of secondary desirability, being more costly to obtain and distribute than wood, as well as being dirty and polluting. Coal was more restricted in its spatial distribution than wood, so that a whole new costly distribution system had to be developed. Mining of coal from the ground was more costly than obtaining a quantity of wood equivalent in heating value, and became even more costly as the most accessible reserves of this fuel were depleted. Mines had to be sunk ever deeper until groundwater flooding became a serious problem. Ultimately, the steam engine was developed and employed to pump water out of mines. A similar historical course was followed with the depletion of the forests in the earliest settled parts of the United States. Actually, what they call the moors in England are the result of deforestation. The trees were cut down, and then the soil became completely eroded, leading to the moonscapes called the moors, which many people find to be quite romantic. Tainter writes, the increased costliness per unit of thermal value in the initial shift from wood to coal is apparent, but unfortunately, a good quantitative data on returns to energy investment are usually not available before the recent period. Modern data not only illustrate the trend quantitatively, but indicate that the process of declining marginal returns is continuing. Adjusted for inflation, each dollar invested in energy production in 1960 yielded approximately 2.25 million BTUs. By 1970, this has declined to 2.17 BTUs, while in 1976, the same dollar would produce only 1.85 million BTUs. The world's consumers do not need to be shown such figures to know that energy and minerals production follows the classic curve of declining marginal returns. Information processing. The processing of large quantities of information is an essential aspect of complex societies, and indeed, the need for this processing is probably one of the reasons that such societies came into existence. Yet the costs of information processing in many spheres show a trend of declining marginal productivity. Gregory Johnson has shown graphically that as the size of a social group increases, the communication load increases even faster. Information processing increases in response until capacity is reached. After this point, information processing performance deteriorates so that greater costs are allocated to processing that is less efficient and reliable. At this point, information processing hierarchies may be expected to develop. In the same vein, Moore has suggested that when the amount of information processed by a society is small, much can be collected at low cost. As the amount of information spreads, however, the marginal cost of useful information grows rapidly, in part because redundancy of information increases. Complex societies engage in a large number of information processing activities. Among those for which data could be gathered that would be pertinent to the present problem are research and development, education, and the development and maintenance of information channels. These are certainly not the only spheres of information processing in complex societies, but they are essential ones. The marginal productivity of research and development in the United States and elsewhere displays a disturbing trend. Figure 9 shows clearly that as the number of scientists, engineers, and technicians in the United States rose between 1900 and 1954, their productivity, as reflected in patents issued, declined sharply. Furthermore, the number of patent applications relative to the population of the United States rose until about 1920 and then began to decline. Patent applications, filed between 1941 and 1960 relative to personnel and expenditures committed to R&D declined noticeably. At first glance, these charts seem to indicate declining marginal returns for investment in research and development. Some additional discussion is necessary, though, to demonstrate that this is so. Fritz Machlup, the source of these data, suggests that three factors may potentially account for them. A, declining productivity of inventing. B, decline in proportion of patentable inventions. And C, decline in propensity to patent. Various economists have made similar suggestions. Makhluk suggests that the major part of the decline in patenting is due to the growth of military R&D, which does not usually yield patentable inventions. Despite Makhluk's caution, a number of factors suggest that the productivity of research and development has indeed declined. For one thing, the data in Figure 9 show that patents have been declining in respect to population and number of technical workers since about 1920, well before the R&D effort of World War II and thereafter. Even more significantly, patenting relative to numbers of scientists and engineers has declined continuously since 1900. Jacob Schmuckler has compiled figures showing that excluding government-financed projects, the number of industrial research personnel increased 5.6 times from 1930 to 1954, while the numbers of corporate patents rose between 1936 to 40 and 1956 to 60 by only 23%. The problem, furthermore, is not restricted to the United States. In a survey of 50 countries, many of which do not invest heavily in military R&D, evidence showed that inventions per scientist and engineer have declined in nearly all cases between the late 60s and the late 70s. In both the US and Japan, between 1964 and 1979 to 80, the ratio of patents to productive inputs fell in almost all industries. In the US, between 1964 and 1978, R&D spending per scientist and engineer increased at an annual rate of 0.0047, while patenting declined at an annual rate of 0.0283. There has been a similar pattern in Japan. There are, moreover, other data suggesting declining productivity of inventing activity in the industrial world. Cornell Hart has demonstrated consistent patterns of increasing and then declining rates of patenting logistic curves in many fields that are partially or wholly unrelated to military R&D. These include airplanes, automobiles, cotton machinery, electric meters, radios, sewing machines, spinning machinery, sulky plows, telegraphy, telephony, typewriters, yes, I got it right, typewriters, and weaving machinery. He also notes that the same patterns are evident in the major inventions and discoveries of the Western world and in patents sealed in Great Britain between 1751 and 1820 and between 1821 and 1938. Thus, it seems that military R&D cannot account for more than a small part of the decline in patents. Furthermore, the decline is widespread in so many fields over such a long time that declining propensity to patent can hardly account for it either. Recent research shows that there is, in fact, a strong positive relationship between R&D and patenting. Thus, the patent statistics appear to be a reliable indicator of inventive accomplishment. It would appear that there has indeed been a genuine drop in the inventive productivity of research and development, and that investments in R&D have increased from 0.1% of gross national product in 1920 to 2.6% in 1960. The marginal product of these investments has declined. Although there are some demurrals, many economists recognize this trend. Medical research and application provide a good example of a declining marginal return for increased investment in a scientific field. While it is less easy to measure the benefits of medicine than its costs, one sure indicator is life expectancy. Unfortunately, ever larger investments in healthcare do not yield proportionate increases in longevity. In 1930, the United States expended 3.3% of its gross national product to produce an average life expectancy of 59.7 years. By 1982, 10.5% of GNP was producing a life expectancy of 74.5 years. The pattern in the intervening years is shown in Figure 11. It can be seen from this chart that from 1930 to 1982, the productivity of the U.S. national healthcare system, measured thus, declined by over 57%. And U.S. Bureau of the Census. In fact, it is likely that the decline in the productivity of medicine has been even greater, for the effects of improved nutrition and sanitation on increasing life expectancy have not been included. And I should mention that as we have seen, that life expectancy, in the United States, has actually declined in recent years. So no more to be got from that, it would seem. And now let's talk about disinformation. And there is a famous saying that's subscribed to Bismarck, it's subscribed to the journalist Claude Cockburn: never believe anything until it has been officially denied. And that is now my default position of anything that comes from journalism or from governments. This is by Christopher Nardi at the National Post. Russian doctored photos claim to show Canadian military fighting in the Ukraine. Kremlin officials have been involved directly in coordinating disinformation efforts aimed at advancing Russia's geopolitical goals and undermining its Western adversaries. Says who? Russia is spreading doctored photos falsely claiming Canadian military members are fighting on the front line in Ukraine, says our country's digital spy agency. And of course, spy agencies have never lied to the public. Never, ever, ever, ever. The Communications Security Establishment said Wednesday it was part of a new disinformation campaign by Russia targeting Canada. Kremlin officials have been involved directly in coordinating disinformation efforts aimed at advancing Russia's geopolitical goals and undermining its Western adversaries, according to newly declassified information posted on social media by CSE. Lately, CSE says Russia has not only used state and local media sources to spread disinformation, but has also grown its influence among, quote, non-state pro-Russia, unquote, voices that reach millions of people, namely on social media, despite the fact that, say, Twitter is banning all of them. Kremlin efforts to manipulate global audiences are advanced via various communication platforms that often feature anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, anti-alphabet people materials, anti-immigrant commentary, anti-globalist sentiment, and QAnon content, CSE warned. The statement did not name any of those platforms. This argument, which we are hearing more and more of, it's not the effective argument that they think it is. Oh, so many of these people who are rather skeptical of the Ukraine and its president, Zelensky, these are the same people who are against COVID mandates. Yeah, and what does that tell you? What it tells me is that the same group of people are rightly skeptical. Now, our leaders claim to be, empiricists, and they're ever so skeptical, except that they're not. They are not. Let's look at the figures regarding the efficacy of the mRNA treatments. Well, the government of the United Kingdom decided we're not going to give you those data anymore because they're too embarrassing. When in the last report for March, almost 90% of those admitted to hospital in the United Kingdom for coronavirus have been vaccinated. And over 90% of those who have died or their deaths have been attributed to COVID-19 have been vaccinated. We were told that the mRNA treatments were almost fully efficacious and almost fully free from contraindications. That has turned out to be a lie. But no, you got to trust government agencies. The article continues, Russia is also pushing disinformation through state-controlled online outlets deliberately created to look and sound like a legitimate media outlet. Oh, I see. And perhaps that explains why the Voice of America / Radio Liberty, which is a wholly owned government propaganda network run by the U.S. government, is not labeled as such by Twitter. I wonder why that might be. CSE declined to provide names of outlets, social media pages, or online influencers that it found to be peddling Russian misinformation and disinformation, citing operational security concerns. Yes, do you like that one from the intelligence agencies? Terrible people are doing terrible things. Who are the terrible people? We can't tell you. What are the terrible things they're saying? We can't get specific. But of course, you should trust these people. And of course, the Ukrainians never lie, except about the ghost of Kiev and the mobile crematoria and the destruction of the monument at Babi Yar. Oh, and Mrna, from the pregnant woman from the hospital in Mariupol, and the deliberate attack to kill civilians at hospital in Mariupol and theater in Mariupol. And it goes on and on and on. But of course, the Ukrainians, they would never, never lie, whereas the Russians lie about everything. Russia's efforts are now deliberately targeting Canada because we're so very important, as it tries to falsely claim that NATO and Canadian military members are actively deployed in Ukraine to fight against Russian troops invading their western neighbor. Perhaps CSE could release some of these allegedly doctored photos, so we might have a chance to judge this claim. No, they're not going to do that. This is happening through fake stories planted in Russian-backed outlets. This included false narrative about the presence of Canadian Forces members in the Donbass regions, which was timed with news of the arrival of the Canadian Forces members in Ukraine to secure the Canadian embassy in Kyiv, CSE revealed, referring to events 1 week before Putin launched the invasion into Ukraine on February 24th. But the Cyber Defense Agency also found that the Kremlin had directed these outlets to also publish doctored images of CAF members on the front lines fighting against Russia in Ukraine. Again, let's see the pictures. In other cases, the publications purported that Canadian military members were committing war crimes despite none actually being deployed in Ukraine. Oh, they're there, but they're not deployed. And of course, as we've learned, and as the Canadian Forces has admitted, Canada spent money to train the Azov Brigade. Yeah, that's right. Because it's important that, the neo-Nazis have the best training that Canadian taxpayers can pay for. Spokesperson Evan Kronanevsky said that some of the examples come from planned future Russian disinformation campaigns that CSE learned of in advance through classified intelligence reporting. We believe there is value in highlighting Russian, both planned and ongoing disinformation activities associated with their illegal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, Kronofsky said by email. How about the illegal and unjustifiable coup d'etat that Victoria Nuland and the American government perpetrated on Ukraine in 2014? Why don't we talk about that? Russian disinformation activities are not solely focused on the Ukraine-Russia geographical area, he added. Rather, they are targeting both Russian and Ukrainian-speaking audiences around the world, including Canada. Canada's spy agencies have repeatedly warned that Russia was one of the biggest backers of cyber threats against this country. What cyber threats? Name one. Name one. They also say Russia is an extremely capable threat actor who is notorious for promoting disinformation campaigns to further its interests and hamper its opponents. You mean like claiming that Iraq has to be invaded because of their weapons of mass destruction, or that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11? That's disinformation, is it not? How about Russiagate? How about the fantastic Steele dossier, which was made up for Hillary Clinton's campaign and then was disseminated through the so-called intelligence community, which claimed that Trump was not a legitimate president, that steps would need to be taken to constrain his power. Generals were saying this. Oh, no, and we're going to tell the foreign countries of the world about, what Trump is doing, which some people might consider to be treason, Another examples given were false narratives from Russia about Ukrainians as well as anti-war protesters in Russia. For example, CSE said it found evidence that Russia was promoting fake stories purporting that Ukrainians were harvesting organs of fallen soldiers, women, and children, and then hiding the evidence through mobile cremating devices. Oh, I see they've made a comeback in a different context. 2 weeks ago, CSE also warned, we've seen Russia's efforts to promote stories that falsely categorize Russian protesters and citizens opposed to the invasion as supporting neo-Nazis and genocide. The agency concluded that Russia was unsurprisingly pushing a false media narrative that its invading forces were only attacking military targets in Ukraine. This is an unsupported claim that Russian officials have repeatedly pushed at the United Nations, as well as interviews around the world. Well, if you are going to take your soldiers and you are going to infiltrate schools and hospitals and the like with the soldiers who are heavily outnumbered, and use schools, hospitals, and the like as human shields. Apartment buildings, another example. Use them as human shields then, well, you know what is going to happen as a result of that. I was thinking just before this show of the destruction of the city in Central Europe, which used to be called Breslau. This happened at the very end of World War II. And because no surrender, no retreat. Breslau, which is now part of Poland and has a different name, was one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It was almost completely destroyed, and we tended to blame the Germans for that. The Germans, used the people as human shields, and they burrowed into, buildings and hospitals and schools and the like, and refused to leave or surrender, with the result that Breslau was almost completely destroyed. And whose fault is that? But, when the Germans did it in World War II, that made them wicked. When the Ukrainians and, the neo-Nazi Ukrainians do it, that makes them heroes. So the fact that the National Post has been used to disseminate, let's say, these dubious claims of Canadian intelligence suggests to me that the Canadian military members are indeed fighting in the Ukraine. Why would they feel the need to deny this so firmly? I have not seen very many claims, that the Canadian soldiers are fighting in the Ukraine. That does seem to be absent from the media conversation, at least in the West, or at least in English. Let's go to the Drudge Report and see whether World War III has started yet. Russia says Black Sea Fleet flagship has sunk. Claim hit by missiles traveling 650 miles per hour. Poll, 82% think Putin is a war criminal. Vlad losing control of his own spiraling minions. Spiraling minions? World's largest yacht seized by Germany. How about the Russian government simply nationalizes everything? All property owned or controlled by those countries which have imposed sanctions and are simply stealing stuff now. Social media campaign to label Bucha massacre hoax. Well, it appears to be a hoax, at least to me. It certainly has not been investigated. Oh, this is a terrible war crime. Yes, there was a forensic investigation of this? No, there was not. This is from Bloomberg, Margie Murphy. Russia wages social media campaign to label Bucha massacre a hoax. Well, how about Washington wages social media campaign to label Bucha killings Russian war crimes? You want your equivalence? Well, there it is. It's an exact equivalence. Exact. Fox News has been pushing this stuff. Some of the grossest falsehoods about what has happened in the Ukraine were pushed by Fox News, and the female journalist responsible for two of the howlers. She is not known to have been sacked or to have apologized for them. Let's go to antiwar.com. Biden okays $800 million more for Ukraine military. Russia, U.S. NATO arms transports are legitimate military targets. Well, of course they are. Biden-Harris among officials considered for potential visit to Kyiv. U.S. escalates support for Ukraine with training on new weapons. U.S. expands intel sharing with Ukraine to help in war against Russia. Moscow says Ukraine helicopter attacked Russia. Macron doesn't back Biden's genocide claim. I am not an admirer of Emmanuel Macron, but here he is only speaking the truth. That is not what genocide means. Civilians are always killed in war. Genocide means something different. Ukraine rejects visit from German President Steinmeier. And President Zelensky, you may have noticed, is issuing ultimata to the world that the world must do this or else. And of course, Russia is going to be dismantled because the comedian of Kyiv says so. I was at that a man who started a movie called Servant of the People, about probity in politics and anti-corruption. And then a oligarch starts a party called Servant of the People, and this comedian Zelensky is presidential candidate, and he becomes president. But before that, it was revealed that he had secret offshore bank accounts. How much money could a comedian in the Ukraine make? The Ukraine has something like about 3 million more people, or it did before the war started, than Canada. And I'm looking at Canadian comedians, that is to say, that have remained in Canada. Are there any rich ones? Any ones who would need offshore bank accounts? Rick Mercer? Maybe, but no one else. Yeah, the Guardian was leading the charge against Zelensky. But of course, now that he is the greatest hero that the world has ever seen, they don't talk about that anymore. He's a creature of the oligarchs. And Moon of Alabama, they have nothing new today. But let's go to Maps Ukraine. I've been waiting for this Twitter feed to be banned for quite some time. It's only a matter of time because there are some sources that do not simply amplify Ukrainian agitprop. Ukraine Maps is gone now. These tweets are protected. Only approved followers can see at Maps Ukraine's tweets. Good job, Twitter. And, when people are stifled or banned by Twitter, we say, and that's a good thing, because Twitter and its fact checkers are the sole arbiter of what constitutes truth throughout the universe in perpetuity. And once again, that's a good thing. But Elon Musk buying Twitter obviously would be a very bad thing because he's a rich man. And of course, the people who, own or control Twitter or say Google or Facebook, they are in no way rich. They are people of modest income, modest assets. Let's go to Russian American Daily at Russia USA, which is still up, and see what they have. Anything useful there? Oh yes, age restricted adult content. Yeah, we're not going to let you see any evidence of Ukrainian atrocities against Russian POWs or Russian-speaking people in the Ukraine. No. Gonzalo Lira, who is not yet been banned, says, people consistently ask me if the Russians still haven't won in Ukraine, how on earth could they dial it up? Simple strategic bombers. Philippe Lemoine says, reading pro-Russia Telegram channels is such a weird experience because it's almost the exact mirror image of Twitter. They post videos of captured Ukrainian soldiers, talk about Ukrainian blunders, glorify Russian successes. It's etc. Oh, yes. Zelensky said Russia will either negotiate to end the war on Ukraine's terms or forever disappear from the world's stage. Golly, it kind of sounds like genocide, doesn't it? But of course, there's good genocide and there's bad genocide, as we have learned recently. And the killing of a few thousand civilians, not even targeted killing, is now, according to Joe Biden and others, genocide. Go to a Twitter feed of Pedro Gonzalez of Chronicles magazine and elsewhere. Libs of TikTok tweets, joining Tucker Carlson this evening to discuss my suspension and Twitter censorship. Libs of TikTok, as you may know, this is what people said. Here's a TikTok video of some leftist crazy. But I suppose what they're violating these people's privacy. They put videos up on TikTok, of course, but their privacy needs to be protected. Simply repeating what people have said is now increasingly seen as hate speech. Pedro Gonzalez writes, amid rising costs of food and fuel and an immigration crisis and a crime wave, National Review's Rich Lowry rebuked Americans, calling for restraint toward the war in Ukraine as neo-isolationists. The NR gets war wrong again. I am begging libs to please find another framework for understanding literally anything on God's blessed green earth. Please open a different book, watch something else. Just find one road that doesn't lead to Hitler. I ask but for a crumb. Martyr Maid tweeted, I regret to inform you that National Review is at it again. Fortunately, we've got Pedro Gonzalez on our side this time. Warmongers and cucks, hardest hit. Oh, Joanne Reed, one of the stupidest people in America, certainly one of the stupidest with a platform, who spews anti-white hatred 5 days a week and is just appalled at Elon Musk. Oh, yes, they had some Pajit on her show saying, oh, Elon Musk is looking forward to, looking back to the good old days of apartheid in South Africa. Joy Ann Reed tweeted, Amy Wax thinks American blacks and Brahmins are just green with envy over Anglo-Protestant culture. There's a whole bunch of emojis. By the way, what is that? Yeah, why don't you go back to Africa, Joanne Reed, if you hate our culture so much? Does it involve, yes, I pointed this out. Joanne Reed is not an American. Both of her parents are foreigners from Africa. Does it involve getting rejected by Harvard and the CIA and still winding up with an internet phishing show where you kiki with white supremacist Amy Wax? What? Pedro Gonzalez tweets, you have a net worth in the millions for doing little more than pushing anti-white racism and racial resentment. You could learn something from Amy Wax. She's not capable of learning anything. Joy Ann Reed. Nothing. And that's the reason why she's on MSNBC. And let us go now to Summit News. Leftists melt down over Elon Musk offering to buy Twitter. I think we've covered that one already. Will prominent banned public figures return if Elon Musk buys Twitter? This is by Paul Joseph Watson. Elon Musk's offer to buy 100% of Twitter has prompted fresh speculation as to whether prominent banned figures like Donald Trump and Alex Jones will be allowed back on the platform. After Musk became Twitter's largest individual shareholder earlier this month, the company was quick to issue a public statement asserting that their censorship policies won't be changing. This serves as a clear indication that the likes of Trump and Jones, along with innumerable other victims of the censorship wave that characterized 2018 onwards, won't be returning to the platform. However, now that Musk is in the running for a complete outright purchase of Twitter, the question of whether the band will make a sensational, the band, B-A-N-N-A-D, will make a sensational comeback is being asked once again. President Trump was banned by Twitter after the January 6th Capitol riot, despite the fact that he did not call for or incite any kind of illegal activity, either in person or via Twitter. Jones was banned by Twitter about a month after he was deplatformed by virtually every social media network in existence, a digital assassination that extended to banks, payment processors, and numerous other platforms. However, Twitter struggled to explain the reason for banning Jones and did so primarily under intense pressure over the radio host being banned by everyone else. Do you know that Twitter employees were given a day of rest because of their emotional exhaustion over the news of Trump's? This was at 9.2% ownership. Yes, people who suffer from emotional exhaustion in this manner, what good are they to the company? I mean, honestly, if Twitter fired, say, 50% of its employees, would anyone notice the difference? That is a serious question. American Mama tweeted live at Twitter HQs, and we're seeing a bunch of anguished people screaming and the like. And let's go to information liberation. Fox Business reporter, SEC, DOJ have launched joint investigation into Elon Musk's Tesla amid Twitter takeover bid. I want to talk about the rise of the idiots, which some of you may remember as a manifesto that appeared by one of the protagonists in the show from, well, it's more than a decade old now, called Nathan Barley, written by Charlie Brooker and Chris Morris. There's all different kinds of idiocy. Some of it is actually the result of declining brain function. This is from Tal Copan and Joe Garofoli at the San Francisco Chronicle. When a California Democrat in Congress recently engaged in an extended conversation with Senator Dianne Feinstein, they prepared for a rigorous policy discussion like those they'd had with her many times over the last 15 years. Instead, the lawmaker said they had to reintroduce themselves to Feinstein many times during an interaction that lasted several hours. Rather than delve into policy, Feinstein, 88, repeated the same small talk questions like asking the lawmaker what mattered to voters in their district. The member of Congress said with no apparent recognition the two had already had a similar conversation. The episode was so unnerving that the lawmaker, who spoke to the Chronicle on condition they not be identified because of the sensitivity of the topic, began raising concerns with colleagues to see if some kind of intervention to persuade Feinstein to retire was possible. Feinstein's term runs through the end of 2024. The conversation, well, actually, it runs to the beginning of 2025, but never mind. The conversation occurred several weeks before the death of her husband in February. I've worked with her for a long time and long enough to know what she was like just a few years ago, always in command, always in charge, on top of the details, basically couldn't resist a conversation where she was driving some bill or some idea. All of that is gone. She was an intellectual and political force not that long ago, and that's why my encounter with her was so jarring, because there was no trace of that. Segregation. That is a subject which is taken seriously. I'm talking about segregating white people from people who are not white. Now, again, we're back to Schrodinger's cat, that segregation was a blight on American history. Now, of course, good thing. This is from Janon Fisher at the Daily Mail. English professor defends Indiana University's segregated classes and slams white students who oppose it, telling them it's not about their hurt feelings. Anderson University professor Elizabeth Boltz Ranfield, or Liz Boltz, as she typically calls herself, said that white people should be excluded from racially diverse groups. The school decided to divide groups on race and equality into white students and students of color. Ranfield says that white people are afraid that people of color will say mean things about them because of white fragility, because it's white people that are fragile, not black people. Black people are tough as nails and never resort to moaning or crying because of someone tried to touch their hair or something like that. She says that black people are forced to deal with default white spaces, well, like chamber music concerts, Wilco concerts, say. The Christian University justified its decision to segregate the sessions for more candid discussions. And this is a morbidly obese woman who was wearing a beanie for some reason. And of course, she's got the problem glasses. And yes, morbidly obese with what appears to be a shaved head, or close to a shaved head. Oh, yes, and Martin Luther King is brought into this. This is a Christian college. You know, I looked into this woman, and she was raised in an evangelical household, and she determined later that her efforts to bring people to our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, yes, here we go. Hey, everybody I knew in high school, sorry I probably tried to convert you. Hashtag Teen Mania. Hashtag Teen Mania Ministries. Hashtag cult. Hashtag ex-evangelical. She's an atheist now, a radical atheist. And her world was turned upside down when she married a man, this is by her own confession, who turned out to be a homosexual. And this is one of the things which led her to a wholesale rejection of Christianity. As far as these safe spaces go, we hear more and more about this. And of course, only, Asian people should play Asians in movies. Only Jewish people should play Jewish people in movies. Okay, fine. Uh, let's be fair about this. Okay. I don't think that Jewish actors would be happy by being reduced to, say, 1.2% of the roles, which is their typical percentage of the population. So, how about this? That we agree to stay out of their spaces and they agree to stay out of our spaces. Have we got a deal? But there's a caveat to that. That Liz Bolts and Quislings like her are not allowed to be part of our spaces. I suppose she thinks that she's being very transgressive in coming out in favor of segregation. I don't think she quite understands how many Americans would actually be in favor, they wouldn't dare say it, of a return to Jim Crow. Now, she's too stupid to understand the effects of what she is involved in, but why should that be a surprise? There is a British politician, a black man. Parents came to Britain from Guyana, and he's called David Lammy. And he is a serious person whose words are taken very, very seriously as well. He appears to be an idiot. Daniel Hannan had commented on something that David Lammy had said on the BBC, quote, Churchill replaced Chamberlain just days before the Second World War. Lord George replaced Asquith weeks into Somme. Eden lost his job during the Suez Crisis. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says there are always others to replace Boris Johnson. Daniel Hannan responded, not out of three, I'm afraid, David. Churchill replaced Chamberlain during World War II, prompted by the fall of Norway. I'll point out that the Norway fiasco was entirely Churchill's fault, and he managed to get the top job as a result. Lloyd George replaced Asquith after the Somme offensive had ended, and Anthony Eden resigned the year after Suez following a breakdown in his health. But Lammy has always been, shall we say, economical with the actuality. And he suffered. There's a quiz show in Britain called Mastermind, which has been quite popular for quite some time. There's a celebrity version of this. And David Lammy appeared in 2009, and he suffered a humiliation such that would have driven many people out of public life. So let's talk about this, okay? David Lammy MP was promoted this week in Labour's surprise reshuffle in 2009. Yes, okay, we'll get to that, okay? Let's go to the questions, the mastermind questions. I believe there's a list here. What was the married name of the scientists Marie and Pierre who won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1903 for their research into radiation? David Lammy answered Antoinette. The answer is Curie. Cockpit country is a rugged, inaccessible area on which Caribbean island? Lammy passed. The answer, Jamaica. Which former conservative leader, in a magazine article in August 2000, claimed that while working as a delivery man's assistant, he downed around 14 pints of beer a day. I don't believe that for a second, but Lammy answered William Hague, which is correct. Which fortress was built in the 1370s to defend one of the gates of Paris and was later used as a state prison by Cardinal Richelieu? David Lammy responded, Versailles. The answer, of course, is the Bastille. And he got, there was a question about a player for Tottenham Hotspur, which is supposedly the team that he supports. He got that wrong. James Gandolfini played a mafia boss called Tony in which American television series? Lammy said, The Godfather. The answer, of course, is The Sopranos. What name is used for the highest gallery of seats in a theater? Lammy passed. The answer is The Gods. He got a question right about MI5. Which American military award is given to those who are wounded in action and bears the inscription for military merit on the reverse? Lammy passed. The answer is Purple Heart. So he knew who the singer of Coldplay is. He knew the question, which variety of blue English cheese traditionally accompanies port? Lamy said red Leicester, and the answer is Stilton. Let's see. Oh, he knows who Oprah Winfrey is. Okay, this could be. Okay, here we go. Which country's so-called Rose Revolution of 2003 led to the resignation of its president, Eduard Shevardnadze? David Lammy said Yugoslavia, and the answer is Georgia. This is from the shadow foreign secretary. In chemistry, which French word is used for a tube for transferring measured amounts of liquids? Lammy passed. The answer is a pipette. And here's the best one. Who acceded to the English throne at the age of 9 on the death of his father, Henry VIII, in 1547? Lammy answered, Henry VII. The answer is Edward VI. I mean, does he not know how numerals work? Does he not understand Roman numerals? I mean, even up to 10? I mean, that's the clear implication of this. According to Wikipedia, Lammy was a minister under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, most recently as Minister of State for Universities. Now, this fellow, he studied at a very highly respected university, the School of Law, School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, where he graduated with a second-class degree. And he later got studied at Harvard. There he studied for a Master of Laws degree and graduated in 1997. He's a dimwit. He is an absolute dimwit. Now, it's clear that if it were not for affirmative action, we would know nothing about David Lammy. He would be essentially anonymous. Again, the rise of the idiots. Oh, yes, I was looking at Red Letter Media, and they reviewed a movie. Again, they admitted that they didn't know that existed, and it is by Roland Emmerich, and it is called Moonfall. And this movie was independently funded, strangely enough, a huge budget of around $150 million. And it's on track to lose, $70-80 million? Stupendous flop. It got very little publicity because whoever was in charge of distribution, typically movies of this type, $100-200 million more will be spent on marketing. But there was not that much spent on marketing because I guess they figured that this was likely to be a bomb. But of course, when you don't market a film, you're not going to make any money. So I guess there's a trade-off there. So what this movie is about is the moon starts acting strangely. Okay? Its orbit changes radically. Now, it's not necessary to explain why this would happen. Not necessary to explain at all. But instead, this incredible nonsense about something called a Dyson sphere and a dwarf star being hidden in the moon, and all this great stuff about gravity. For instance, if you hide in a wooden shed, gravity doesn't affect you. So the moon gets closer and closer and closer to the Earth. I'm no expert in this, but I have been assured that if that were to happen, the Earth's gravity would break it up and it would become a ring, like the rings around Saturn. Instead, the moon actually touches the Earth, is rubbing against the Earth. Now, what that would mean for the axis of the Earth and its orbit around the sun, that's not important. The movie doesn't get into that. Leaving aside the fact that the moon rubbing against the Earth would cause just absolutely untold devastation. But there are scenes in the clips in this movie, and they showed some with people running from the moon, people running from gravity out of control. An absolute apocalyptic scene where thousands of bits of the moon, large chunks of the moon, are raining down on the Earth, and people are looking at it as if to say, "Huh, that's interesting." And you see a mountain just being pummeled with enormous chunks of the moon, and apparently anyone associated with this moon knows nothing, say, about volcanic eruptions. When did Mount St. Helens happen? Like 40 years ago, something like that. The area around miles and miles around Mount St. Helens was, no pun intended, a moonscape for many years afterwards because of all of the dust. But apparently that's not a problem. Now, Blockbuster, do we take this sort of thing seriously? Well, Roland Emmerich had a previous blockbuster about global warming and how global warming was going to cause the freezing of the world. Yeah, I don't get it either. It was called the Day After Tomorrow, right? Which was a hit, which was a big hit. But the people who are in charge of Red Letter Media, their verdict is that this type of movie, this kind of disaster porn, it's finished now. No one is interested in it. But it's not just one movie. I mean, we love science now, right? And these shows like Picard and Star Trek Discovery, which are all about the science in them is, well, science does whatever we tell it to. Oh, you know what else is in Moonfall? Nanobots. Yep, first they're in that latest James Bond film. Now they're in this film. And as that fellow, Ryan George, at pitch meetings says, nanobots, what are they? Oh, they're a device whereby we can make anything happen. Because, nanobots they're like magic. So the more that we are popularly obsessed with science, the stupider we become. Now, of course, the moon affects the tides of the Earth. It also affects cycles of the female of the species. And it just occurred to me last night that you could have some fun with that, right? That because of the growing proximity of the moon is like 250,000 miles away, that because of the growing proximity of the moon to the Earth, it just makes cycles go crazy, so that women become, erratic, irrational, overly emotional, and crazy, or more so. That might have been amusing, but of course that would have been fraught with danger because, as we now know, it's not women who have cycles. It is, there are people, with cycles, just people. We don't want to be any more specific than that. I'm going to wrap it up right now. I'm going to let you know that tomorrow I'm going to be discussing an essay at Frank Wright's Substack. frankwright.substack.com. It's called Regime Change Begins at Home, a guide to regime resistance. It's time to stop the snarky comments over the culture war fence and pay attention to the vast, pitiless machine which is rolling over all of our houses. And so I'm going to be discussing this at some length tomorrow. So, if you want to read it before then, again, you can find it at frankwright.substack.com. Oh, yes, I wanted to say something about Roland Emmerich. I found out that he'd made a dramatic film about Stonewall, the so-called, Stonewall Uprising, which was lambasted and pretty much strangled in its cradle because apparently it wasn't intersectional enough. Yeah, imagine that. Emmerich is himself a homosexual, but he's clearly depraved. How about this? Emmerich, this is from Wikipedia. Emmerich owns homes in Los Angeles, New York City, London, and Stuttgart. He likes to decorate his homes in a self-described outlandish manner. adorning them with rare Hollywood memorabilia, murals, and portraits of dictators and communist figures and World War II militaria. Emmerich extensive collection of artwork includes a painting of Jesus Christ wearing a Catherine Hamnet-style t-shirt during his crucifixion, prints of Allison Jackson's works of a Princess Diana lookalike making obscene gestures and engaging in sex acts, a wax sculpture of Pope John Paul II laughing as he reads his own obituary, and a photoshopped image of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in a homoerotic pose. But remember, people, they are virtually normal. They are just like us. Okay, let's take a final look at the chat, and I'll go down to the David the Gnome says, what does the Bible say about homosexuals again? Well, I think we all know that. Of course, people like the Reverend Michael Corrin will tell you, oh, no, it's the old line was, Sodom and Gomorrah. It was about a lack of hospitality. Ah, hospitality, was it? Now, the new line, as pushed by the Reverend Michael Corrin, is that, oh, no, see, it's a condemnation of pedophilia, not to the other stuff. It's just pedophilia that's being condemned. Oh, you mean when, of course, what Angels in America? Does anyone remember that? What a phenomenon it was? And how in that disgusting play, angels are, oh yeah, here angels appear on earth. So the homosexuals, yeah, let's have sex. Yeah, because that's what they think about almost exclusively. Something Gamiston says, funnily enough, a certain Zoomer would always speak of women and moon faces. Tyrone Jackson, The Moon's a Balloon by David Niven. That was the title of his memoirs. David the Gnome says, quantum nanobots would give an author license to do anything with reality and call it science. Okay, hello to Half Galician and to Tom Anderson. Tyrone Jackson alerts us to the existence of a movie called The Astronaut's Wife, 1999, starring Johnny Depp and Charlize Theron. Budget $75 million, box office 19.6. I hope this movie is called The Killing Moon. There's a Echo and the Bunnymen song called The Killing Moon, which I'm quite fond of. KMG show, favorite ice cream. I suppose vanilla. Vanilla with perhaps caramel in it. I think that would be my favorite. What's the I'm trying to remember. There's a Baskin Robbins flavor that is it. It's the base is vanilla, but it's something else. It's not coming to mind. Oh, hang on. Here's the list of flavors, and it's just coming up on the screen. Nope, that's not it. Baseball nut. That's kind of close, but that's not it. That's not it. Chocolate chip cookie dough. I never really understood that. Daiquiri ice. That's not really an ice cream, is it? It's a sherbet. I like the daiquiri ice, but it's not ice cream. Okay, and I'm almost at the bottom here. Lots of Oreos. Butter pecan. I kind of like butter pecan. Pralines and cream. Yeah, that's my favorite. Okay, there we go. So there's an answer to the question. What a learned man, almost like KNG. Lammy and Joy and Reed should go on Jeopardy, says Palmcasso 88. I've actually been writing with a Lammy pen today, says Anrun. Tyrone Jackson says Brendan Behan, the famous Irish playwright, said, I'm a drinker with a writing problem. I only drink on 2 occasions, when I'm thirsty and when I'm not. He didn't live very long, did he? Che Blotarski said, I had to think of the Yahoo Serious movie in order to think of Marie Curie. Of course, I'm reminded of a bit from The Simpsons, their famous show about Australia, which apparently outraged a great many Australians. You call that a knife, etc., etc. Dollary dues. And yes, the U.S. diplomat is explaining that the Australians are angry with the United States because for a short period of time that all things Australian were popular in the United States. And there's a sign on a marquee that says Yahoo Serious Film Festival. And Lisa says, I know those words, but I don't know what this means, which is good. Very funny. What the Simpsons are up to, what, season 29, 30 or whatever? Whenever they run Simpsons reruns on TV, I think I'm going to be, can I be bothered to look at the description of which episode from which season? Because they had, I think, 6 great seasons and then a couple that were occasionally good. And since then, just crummy. But of course, the number of crummy Simpsons episodes to good ones, the ratio is now higher than 2 to 1. True. Kevin, did you like the English bag, The Spectator, the one Taki writes for? They seem to be fully insane in the Ukraine, anti-Russia. No shock, I suppose. When Alexander Chancellor was the editor of The Spectator, it was my favorite magazine. I don't know that I've ever loved a magazine as much as I loved that Spectator. I mean, Oberyn Waugh wrote for it, and Shiva Naipaul wrote for it. Of course, a lot of people associated with The Spectator at that time were also associated with Private Eye. Essentially, it was reading like they were one magazine or 2 versions of the same magazine. There was a nice version and a nasty version. But I interviewed many of the people that wrote for The Spectator. Taki was one, and I interviewed Alexander Chancellor, and I interviewed Pierce Paul Reed and Richard Ingrams and all sorts of people. In retrospect, it seems a golden age. So I had airmail subscriptions to both The Spectator and Private Eye, and sometimes they appear. The Spectator was a weekly and Private Eye was fortnightly, but sometimes they'd appear on the same day, or one day you get one day you get the other, and I take them out somewhere and spend hours reading them. It was very, very pleasurable. Actually, Ann Wilson, the novelist and historian, I also interviewed him. And he was at one point, he was associated with The Spectator. And at one point he was literary editor of maybe both The Spectator and Private Eye. The American Civil War was the best war, says Yo Mama. Civilian casualties. What civilian casualties? Yes. About 400,000 soldiers killed, about 600,000 civilians. And the March to the Sea, Sherman's March to the Sea, is not a stupendous war crime. Okay, The Mouse That Roared, says Pete Bauman. This is a movie from the 1950s. There were several of them with Margaret Rutherford. Ukraine has built USA out of billions. Local schools need more taxes while Ukraine gets free money. And hello to Palpicasso88, and goodbye, because that's it. That's it for today. I shall be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you all for tuning in. Always greatly appreciated. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I'll leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.